Like she said, my name is DJ Quam, and I graduated twice, once in 2010 and again in 2012. This is kind of everything she just said, so I'm not going to read it to you, but during my time here, I also did some things with the residence life, office, and the areas of community service. And I don't know, but when I look at this, the word entrepreneurship doesn't exactly jump off the page to me, but hopefully by the end of this, we'll kind of understand where, at least where you might be able to pick up some of the pieces that I've maybe outlined a little bit here. According to Kate, and when I was working with her, we designed this title of the talk, Engineering New Venture Ideas, Innovation in the Biomed Space. So I kind of want to calibrate our definitions, at least so that we're all on the same page going forward about what it is my goal for today's discussion is. So engineering, 2 degrees in engineering, I'm going to say that engineering is the application of technical problem-solving skills and engineering principles to solve a problem, right? And innovation is, from my perspective, designing some new product to meet some unmet need of a customer. And the biomed space is very nebulous, it's very large, it can mean a lot of different things. And like I said, it's very big. So at the really high level, the biomed space involves things like agricultural and feedstock. If you wanted to genetically engineer corn to be pest resistant, if you wanted to, you could filter that into the biomed space. Drugs and pharmaceuticals, the same thing. There's a huge resurgence of drug research right now because a lot of the patents are hitting their 20-year birthday, meaning that everything's going to go generic. So there's a huge push in the pharmaceutical world to make something new, make the next groundbreaking device so that the Pfizers and the GlaxoSmithKlines can have their patents for another 20 years. And then here's where my experience has been, is in the medical devices and equipment world, which is going to be involving things like CT scanners, X-ray machines, and what people at GE call capital equipment, when you make a $1 million purchase. And then there's also the research and the stem cell and the genetic research that goes into the biomed space as well. You need to have really big equipment to carry out pharmaceutical manufacturing. And that's a whole other world that you don't hear about very much, or at least I never did in my time at Marquette. How do you build a mass scale production to do genetic research? That's a part of the biomed space too. And then something that's coming out also is, how do you sell this and make it available to the right people at the right time in the right location? That's a whole other thing, the distribution chain, which is something that, having been at GE, you don't sell a CT scanner directly to a customer. I mean, there's like 3 links to the chain before it actually gets to the right person. And like I said, my experience has been in the device world. So that involves things like hearing aids, stents for the heart if you had someone might have had an angioplasty, artificial joints, the patient monitors at a hospital. All those things kind of roll up into the device world. And some of you might recognize this pocket ultrasound. That's a kind of imaging equipment that's manufactured by GE Healthcare. It's actually not a whole lot bigger than my mouse. It fits in your hand. It has probes and it has attachments for heart and gynecological and obstetrics, all those kinds of scans in the palm of your hand. So that's a new product that GE put out about a year ago. They started selling it. Of course, it's been in the pipeline for a lot longer. But a lot of the big things that are happening in healthcare and in the medical device world are kind of circulating around some bigger themes. Cost and productivity. We all know that what we need to do is be able to do more with less. Hospitals are really crunched on their budgets. They need to, if they're going to buy a piece of $1 million equipment, they need to know that it can do a lot, that it's worth every penny that they're investing. And they're also pushing us to have devices that better meet their needs. So instead of a long list of features that no one actually needs, only give me what I'm looking for. And then finally, you also have to utilize new technology, because otherwise you're going to stall in the R&D process and you're not going to create anything new or innovative. And it's a really fine balancing act to understand where's the line between exciting new technologies and then the cost and productivity pieces. And this drives to one of the first projects that I wanted to talk to you about. It's something I actually did a couple of years ago while I was at Marquette. It was my senior design project. So for those engineers in the room, if you haven't hit your senior project yet, I'm sorry. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of fun. And so this problem came to us from actually GE Healthcare, unrelated to what I do now. And they said, we want an EKG machine on a stick. And what that meant was, for those of you that have the USB flash drives, imagine a really sophisticated heart monitoring device that fit on your USB flash drive, okay? And there's a lot of different reasons they asked for it in that way. Electrocardiography, or EKGs, they're important tools to understanding someone's heart health, arrhythmias and conduction abnormalities. But they can cost like $50,000 each. They're large pieces of equipment. Sometimes they have treadmills attached. Other times they need sophisticated internet access to interface with a hospital's electronic health system. And of course, a really high price tag. But that doesn't meet the needs of people who live in, say, rural China, who may not have a reliable supply of electricity, who may not actually have a doctor in the area on a regular basis, all of which really precludes the use of some of these really big and fancy pieces of equipment. And low cost is something that you're going to hear a lot about if you go into, say, a more traditional medical device world. I've listened to a lot of talks at GE about how do you make the right device for the right customer. So healthcare solutions for countries like India and China, and now also Brazil, their needs for medical devices are just really different than what they are, say, here in the United States or the UK or France. They're willing to accept really basic medical devices that have fewer features than we might want here in the US, because they need to operate at a much lower price point, because they're trying to treat a vast number of people. They're having very limited resources, and then it's just simply a matter of they don't have the resources to buy these really expensive pieces of equipment at the quantities that they need to treat their entire populations. Limited access to hospitals and clinics. I think you can probably guess how far and wide the clinics might be spread out through a country like China, especially on the western side of China. And finally, rural health presents infrastructure issues. Are you going to have internet access? Are you going to have reliable supply of electricity? And this also trickles down to countries in Central America, where if you're in a village, you don't necessarily have a reliable source of electricity to power some of these big things. And then, what are you actually needing to do? Some of the primary health care that we see here in the US is really sophisticated. If you wanted to buy a $5 million MRI scanner, that's great. You're going to be able to do a lot of different things with it. But you could also buy a $1 million CT scanner and do a lot of the same things, or you can buy a $6,000 pocket ultrasound that's battery operated and can travel around with you no matter where you are. It doesn't need to be plugged in. It doesn't need internet access. So it's kind of changing the mindset of what you're trying to do in terms of creating these medical devices. If I want to sell a medical device in Brazil, India, or China, I might be thinking more about they only need the basics. If I just need to make sure that my baby is healthy, that the heart is beating, you don't need a $100,000 ultrasound machine. You can do that with a really basic $6,000 device and be able to make diagnosis and then triage the patients appropriately. So there's some interesting and really exciting low-cost things that are happening really close to home. I'm sure some of you have heard about the Marquette human-powered nebulizer project that Dr. Olson's running out of the Biomedical Engineering Department. This is a great example of a healthcare product that's really targeting a specific group of people. They have asthma or some other respiratory disorder where they need to take nebulizer treatments. But again, reliable source of electricity comes into play here, where they're using a bicycle to power the vaporizer that actually drives the medication delivery. And I don't know the price points, and this has gone through a lot of different iterations, many different iterations, to kind of come to where they are now. I actually have a friend who's, I forget at what year she is in her studies at MIT, but she's actually building a device to actually manufacture sanitary pads for women in Africa and in areas where bleeding disorders are actually a very big health concern about women's health. And so they're taking this unpowered, it's completely hand crank powered device. They designed this, and it manufactures women's sanitary pads out of banana leaves. And so imagine having this ability to make something that you need for your own health and well-being right there, and presumably there's one device for many people. Another example of you're meeting the needs of someone that you may not necessarily, you don't live their lifestyle every day, right? And then finally, I had the opportunity to go to a conference at Stanford earlier this year, and one of the keynote speakers spoke about a program called Biodesign, and it's a formalized program at Stanford, and they have locations and satellite offices in India and Shanghai. And he was talking about one of the capstone projects that their students did, where In India, they have ambulances and stretchers, but these stretchers are really expensive. They're heavily engineered to make sure that everyone's safe, but they didn't have the ability to have stretchers for every ambulance. So people were being transported medically without the proper securing, neck and all the different kinds of conditions that you need to be safely transported. So then they started looking at the cardboard splints that you have. If you break your arm and you are immediately splinted by an EMT, and they created a stretcher with that same design concept of cardboard and reinforced cardboard to make those stretchers available to all the different ambulance companies around the area at a much lower price point, which is exactly what they needed. Also talked about portable. If I'm a traveling cardiologist or a traveling doctor through a rural area, you're going to face things like I've said before about electricity. And then if I want to have something in my back pocket to do quick diagnosis to make sure someone's healthy, I don't want to carry around a really big ultrasound machine and a really big EKG machine. I kind of want everything all together. So the project that I started talking about a little bit ago, we ended up coming up with a solution for ECG on a stick with a netbook. And this netbook, according to Google, was $250. It has good battery life, and it would actually be powering our ECG device. So by the time we actually finished our project, we made the medical device that, here's my laptop. This is the actual ECG device, all the circuitry. There's a microchip on the underside that has all the software that you needed to make it all work. We hooked it up to ourselves, and we were actually able to take an ECG all powered off of the laptop. And this is something that GE actually patented. And they're not actively pursuing it right now, but the fact that they took the resources to pay for the patent, and I can tell you, because we were on such a short timeline, to get this little printed circuit board, which again is about the size of my mouse, they were willing to invest $5,000 to have it printed overnight at a company in California. So that's kind of what I'm trying to emphasize. People know that this is an important thing to do to drive that innovation in the portable space. Again, another picture. And what we kind of did here is I'm trying to emphasize the fact that we thought about who our customer was. It was going to be a healthcare provider who wanted a very small and portable self-powered device that provided that kind of primary healthcare to assess someone's heart health. And so when we kind of worked through it, here's the dimensions of our finished device. Here's, as an electrical engineer, the power operations. But ultimately, the bill of materials, the list of things that you needed to build it, was about $50. And so that brings your price point down pretty far from the $50,000 price tag that you might expect to spend on the big piece of capital ECG equipment. So just for those of you who might not be familiar with medical devices, everything is regulated by governments. So if you want to start making medical devices, you have to kind of consider, how am I going to be able to sell it? Because the FDA will not let you sell a medical device unless you have clearance from them. And there's divisions and whole consultancy firms that only exist to help people understand how to get something cleared by the FDA. And anytime you want to claim about how fantastic your device is, so if we wanted to take our medical device that I just talked about and claim that it was just as good as the desktop piece of equipment for $50,000, you have to have valid clinical data to be able to say that. It's a claim, and if you're making false claims, you actually go to jail. So just something to think about, that is, as you're thinking about these innovations, also think about, how am I going to get through the regulators? How am I going to make the claims that I want to do? Because that's an important step to making money on your idea. So some things that I learned about this project is low cost is not something that comes natural, especially for engineers. As an engineer, I always wanted to make the biggest, the fastest, the best device, but that's not what our customer needed. They wanted something small, simple, de-featured is kind of the term that gets used. And so we really had to constantly be coming back to how do we make this customer happy? We need to make it small, we need to make it light and portable and all these things. And we did this whole project in the course of 9 months, which you're driving the project really fast. And so therefore some flaws are very visible and then other ones get hidden. So from an engineering and kind of innovation perspective, if you're trying to get something out really fast, you have to think about, am I going to test it? Am I going to work with customers? Once I have a prototype, am I going to work with customers on it? Because those were something that we consciously skipped. And I'm going to just say that team dynamics is, of course, very important because you're spending a lot of time with these people, a lot of time, and if the personalities don't jive well, you're just not set up well for success. And we wanted to look at the customer's needs from their own perspective, and as people who were trying to provide an unmet need to them, we wanted to understand what they needed before they did. So there was a lot of kind of proactive thinking. If it's portable, it might get dropped. So therefore, we need to make it really rugged. If it's self-powered, what if you lose all the computer settings? So therefore, we kept a battery on the backside so that everything kind of is maintained. So kind of thinking about customer needs before they realize it's a problem was very an important understanding and important process to be able to get through it. And this was kind of a very directed project. It kind of flowed from one step to the next because we had a lot of guidance from people at GE. The next project I'm going to talk about was much more organic and much more perhaps what you might experience outside of this classroom setting, where we had a lot of issues of kind of coming back to the customer and saying, is this what you wanted? No, it's not. Why don't you redo this? So the next thing that I would like to take some time to talk about is the visualization, which is, of course, perhaps why you're here. This was my master's thesis, and I have to kind of give credit to Dr. John Ladisa, who's here in the Biomedical Engineering Department. He was my advisor. And Dr. Woods, who's a surgeon at the Medical College of Wisconsin. He actually funded the whole thing, so I have to give credit where credit is due here. Pediatric cardiovascular diseases, congenital heart diseases can come in a lot of different varieties. For example, tetralogy of Fallot, there's issues with the actual internal structure of the heart, coarctation of the aorta, something where a little baby has essentially a string tied around the main blood vessel in your heart. If these things aren't fixed, the life expectancy isn't strong. But imagine trying to do open heart surgery on a little baby. Very small, and the fact that if you did 10 operations, you'd see 10 very different anatomies, meaning it varies a lot from patient to patient. So as a surgeon, the person who's doing these, Dr. Woods in our case, was having a hard time knowing before the operation what he was going to be seeing in the operating room, okay? And he actually called a meeting with myself, Dr. Ladisa, Dr. Rapella is the department chair in the Biomedical Engineering Department, in April of 2011. And we had no idea what this meeting was all about. We just walked into his office and he sat down and he said, I want a hologram. And we were sitting here scratching our heads like, okay, what does that mean? This is a quote hologram of Tupac. That's my attempt to be cool. And this is actually from last year. It was at a concert. And they had this pretty lifelike seeming image of the rapper on stage going right, I forget who he was performing with, but that was the hologram, right? So the doctor wanted to be able to take a medical scan like a CT or an MR and then have something come up out of the table, a lot like in Star Wars where they have the globe come up and this is what he wanted. He wanted to be able to have this be the child's heart, and he wanted to be able to take his hands and cut through it and open it up and zoom in and peel away layers of the heart, all because as a surgeon, he needs to know exactly how the left ventricle is aligned in the heart. These are really important things for him to understand if he's going to keep the operation time down, which is, of course, important for outcomes in a surgery like that, to make sure you're on anesthesias for as little time as possible. So here I am. I'm an engineer. I'm thinking through this. I'm sitting in his office, and he's, in a sense, wanting me to propose a solution right here. He's been thinking about this for a long time. He's been having issues with having this, the term he used was distorted anatomy, which is really just the wide variation across patients, right? That's what he was struggling with. And we had to kind of assess what is the state of the art. How do we come up with holograms of someone's heart and make it manipulatable? Or how do you make it so that you can change things around with your hands and spin it and zoom in and all these things? And I hadn't seen the movie Minority Report at the time, but I've since come to realize he might have seen that and been thinking that in the back of his mind the whole time. So what we ultimately decided to do was not pursue it. that's actually the day after the meeting with Dr. Woods. I was talking to one of my lab mates, and he came up to me and he said, DJ, how'd that meeting with Dr. Woods go? And I said, he wants holograms. And we both laughed and then walked away and did other things. And that was an interesting couple of months because I kind of had it in the back of my mind. I was thinking through it. I was kind of thinking of ways, how might I provide, because I'm the solution provider in this scenario, what it is that he's looking for. And I didn't work on it at all over the course of the summer. So April till about August, I didn't touch this again. And then he emailed Dr. Ladisa and said, I really want to continue working on this with you. And so then we said, oh, okay. And he kind of mentioned that he might be willing to fund some of it because as a doctor at the medical college, and he's also a professor, therefore he's expected to do some research, and he had some funding available to help get us started. Okay, so that's, as someone who's in an academic research setting, funding is, woo, yes! And so we decided to jump on it. And so from about August till October 27th was our next meeting with him, I spent a lot of time trying to understand what was the state of the art. Because if we're going to be doing this, if we're going to fund it and expect to be able to turn it into a product, we can't do something someone else is already doing. So there was a lot of time spent researching the academic journals, the science, nature, all those kinds of things. And what we found was that this did not exist. I mean, it took a long time to feel confident saying that because Google patents and trying to understand what had been patented already and what are current researchers working on, that takes a lot of time and a lot of digging and a lot of persistence. I worked with the Marquette Library a lot on the interlibrary loan because I had to get all these journal articles that Marquette didn't subscribe to, so I spent a lot of time with them. And here's kind of what we came up with. We wanted to go to this meeting in October with the kind of proposals. And we knew that we weren't going to be able to provide the Star Wars hologram, but we were trying to come up with things by inferring what he wanted, because we inferred that he wanted a way to understand the anatomy in 3D, in 3 dimensions. And as some people who have experience with visualization, we had a couple things up our sleeve that we could work with. And so we went to our meeting again in October, and we described a couple different technologies, all of which had their benefits and their drawbacks, of course. This one, it's physically a gel. It's like a cube of gel, and lasers, physically etch it. But of course, it's very slow. You only get one color, and it's not what he wanted. There's this. And I don't know how well you can see it, but this doctor or this researcher in Alabama, he's actually standing behind a semi-transparent screen, and the projector's like projecting through it. And he's seeing things in 3D because of some of the tricks that are going on with some of the projectors. And then there's this, like a tablet. Microsoft has this tablet. It's called Surface. And at the time, it wasn't a tablet that you could actually buy on the market. I think now it is. So we kind of said, how do you want to use this? Do you want to be physically in the operating room and spinning this around as the patient is standing there? Or do you want to do kind of like a pre-surgical planning type tool where you take the scan of the patient and then you collaborate with your peers and decide how are we going to do this surgery? And through conversations, we kind of came to the camp that he wanted to use this before surgeries and really basically, that gave us a lot more freedom because when you're in an operating room, everything has to be sterile. You can't touch anything. So that gave us a lot of flexibility in terms of how we designed it. And we kind of broke it out into 2 pieces, the software, which was like how do you spin it around, and then, of course, the hardware. We used a Microsoft Kinect, actually, is what we ended up using because it's very cheap. They open it up to software developers, and they encourage people to play around with the Kinect. And then I'm going to kind of just tell you about the design that we ultimately kind of finalized on. Here's that semi-transparent screen that I was telling you about, the Microsoft Kinect that would watch the user, and then the projector that's shining through it, so that if you're wearing the 3D glasses like you do in the movie theater, you're actually able to see things in 3D. The Kinect is going to manipulate all the data and all those kinds of things that he was asking for. So a little bit about, that's kind of where our development ended, and that's kind of where the project currently sits. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we have planned, or I should say what Dr. Woods' vision are for this. it's not quite ready to go to, it's about ready to go to a venture capital funding type position, because our goal here was not to create the medical device that would actually go and be used by doctors. We wanted to create the medical device, or I should say the prototype, that we could bring to a group of people that would be excited by it and be willing to fund further investigation on it. So our goal here wasn't necessarily to make the next and best thing, but enough of it to prove that we had expertise and competence and that we had a good idea, because he had a lot of doctors come in and sit with us and they said, yeah, this is good, we would use this. And we kind of had to outline, where do we think it would be used? Essentially, we think that this could be purchased by a hospital's radiology department, the department of a hospital that does all the scans, because they would bring this in as like an extra tool that a doctor can use after a scan. That's what we kind of foresee this going, is we want to bring what we already have to someone who is going to get excited about it, fund it further, and ultimately develop a kind of universal type software system that could be used for, of course, heart, because that's where our kind of roots are, so to speak, but also for things in other parts of the abdomen, because that's where everything is so compact and so difficult to understand. And I'm not going to go into this because I'm a little short on time, but ultimately there's some other flavors that you can use desktop with like a stereoscopic 3D type TV screen. And some kind of key takeaways from this. We almost missed a really cool opportunity because we walked away from it thinking we're not interested. And I guess the only thing I can say here is go with your gut, and when someone comes knocking, don't say no thank you. Understand the goal. So remember how I talked about our goal wasn't to make the product, our goal was to make a prototype that would help us get to the next step. We leveraged our own expertise because we had to use some of our own experience with the visual technologies that helped to make this all possible. The doctor had the idea, but we brought the expertise, so that was a very big collaboration. And then doing your homework, that was really important because, like I said, you don't want to build a device that someone else has already made. So defining the customer needs well, the use case, remember talking about before surgery, that was our goal to get this used. Work collaboratively to incorporate realistic technical limitations. The whole Star Wars hologram thing, he was stuck on that for a really long time. Like until about a year ago in November, he was still saying to us, why can't I have holograms? Because he was under the impression that it was like a battery issue, that was how he understood the problem. And so we kind of, I'm going to use a GE term, we used change acceleration to help him understand that the problem isn't batteries, it's that the technology doesn't exist. And we had to be honest about saying, if that's what you want, we're the group that has experience with medical images, we have experience with 3D technologies, but we're not the group that you would want to work with for creating the next hologram. So once he heard that, he kind of jumped on board with what we were proposing because he knew that we were persistent, that we were good at what we were doing, but that we weren't going to be able to deliver on the Star Wars hologram. And then finally, understanding the state of the art. Like I said, that took me about 2 months of a lot of Google patent reading, a lot of academic research reading to understand what's already out there, what might be coming to market very shortly based on what I'm reading in the academic journals, and the pricing. That was kind of we leveraged some contacts that we had in different companies, and we're realizing that some of these software systems, just the software, sell for $300,000 with $30,000 a month licensing fees, which is, we wanted to buy it to play around with, and of course that fell by the wayside quite quickly. But that kind of showed us that if we've got a good product and something that someone actually wants, there's some great opportunities to really make an impact with what we're trying to do. And the last thing is just intellectual property. We actually filed an invention disclosure with the Marquette Office of Research and sponsored programs with this. And at the moment, it's being reviewed for whether or not Marquette wants to pay all the legal fees, because when you work under Marquette's umbrella, which I was doing at the time, they technically get rights to what you invent. And they give you as the inventor certain things, but in exchange for paying for all the legal fees of getting things actually patented, they retain a few things too. So, but if you wanted to file things independently as an independent inventor, you get discounts with the Office of Patent and Trade, Trenton and Pate Office. And this is not really to talk about, but if I give you the presentation, this is a link to the Patent and Trade Office. So with that, I'm going to conclude my whirlwind chat and really like to talk to you about what questions you have about what I've done, what you might be doing, and just have a good discussion about some of the things I've chatted about. So thank you.
Thank you.